close.
Well, thanks everyone for coming. Which way does it go? Oh, there we go. Awesome. So, hi, I'm Andrew Hatfield, Ambassador for the PMA, your local meetup person. Thanks for coming. This is our first official event in Brisbane for this year. Last year, when we had these, everyone said they wanted them around about a quarter. We just snuck over the line, so my bad. But thanks everyone for coming. Thanks Tricia for hosting. So, obligatory, we do have the summit coming up at the end of the year. I know that some people have loved that event and will continue to love it. Won't we, Ian? Yep. So there is early bird pricing at the minute. Something that we are trying to do this year is have more of an executive track. So previous years it's been a bit of a mix of like growth, individual contributors and seniors. So we do want to get your executives down there. Potentially, depending on how many that we get, we might have a whole separate like breakout session for them so that they've got a bit of a place to talk. That's definitely something that we're facilitating with B2B SaaS tech executives at the minute, but obviously product marketing is broader than that. And something that I have noticed, even just setting this event up, is there's a lot more product marketers in Brisbane. You probably saw there's a lot more RSVPs than turned up, which is pretty normal. But it's great to see that the function is growing. So for those that have been, definitely recommend you come back. For those who haven't come, don't take my word for it. Talk to Ian and he'll tell you how great it is. But he can't say the whole meeting, so. Awesome. So, a couple of things. I wanted to share some thoughts from some research that my company, Deepstar, has observed with specifically complex B2B SaaS in their go-to-market and how those companies are able to reliably scale and continue to grow. So, we all know that winning business is difficult, especially if you're a challenger brand, right? That anywhere from 3 to 5% of your market is in market at any one time, so 95% aren't looking. And we know that around about 40% of them end up in no decision. They kick the decision down the road, they pass the can to somebody else. So 60% choose to do something that is different to the status quo. Of those, 80% start with a shortlist, and of those that purchase, 90% of those purchases are from that initial shortlist. So it's really difficult. If we just look at that math, that's a 0.06% chance of winning. And that's without taking into account all the other things that depress that number even further. So that sounds really terrible, right? So some of you might have seen me start talking a little bit about don't just focus on the short list, start thinking about the long list, right? But one of the biggest reasons for those stats is that we think our stuff is awesome. And most of the time it is. But the customer sees, I've got this massive risk. Any change is potentially bad for them, even if the project works, right? It's not just about the value of your product. It's not just about the value that your product brings the business. There's a big component, which is internal political capital and the fight that goes on internally. And so, we always talk about the buying committee. In many cases, the people that, we've been told are on that committee are proxies for someone else. And in large businesses, often there's political wars going on that you just aren't aware of unless you're well embedded in those accounts. And that sounds really cynical and terrible, but that's big enterprises. And so your value, oh, no, wrong way. You can see that I've done this a lot. Your value might actually be this, but the customer is seeing all of this. Because if the decision to buy your solution works, the company gets the benefit. But if the decision to buy your product doesn't work, they wear the negative. And so that can have a massive political or career impact on them. And so everyone is really risk averse. So that's one large component, right? Again, wrong way. I'll learn. So we know that customers have more than one problem to solve. And it's also unlikely that your product is going to be the only part of the solution that solves that problem, right? We're getting into this cycle of buying over build again. So we used to buy, everything was a vertically integrated stack. I'd buy the hardware, the operating system, and the application from one vendor, vertical integration. Then IBM opened everything up, and we had open systems, and we had different operating systems, and then different application vendors, and we had different storage and data and all that. But we'd still buy COTS, commercial off-the-shelf software. Then we had cloud, and we had containers, and we had DevOps, and everyone went agile because waterfall's terrible. But then we all had Scrum Masters, and so everyone decided we're going to build because buying's terrible. I'm smarter. I'm going to build a better mousetrap. That also had a bunch of problems. And so what we're seeing happen in the marketplace now is that there's this snapback. It's not to the same extent it was back in pre-2015, but there's now this equilibrium between I want to go and buy ready-made components that have integration points, and this is where modern applications really make a big difference around that integration, data, paths, and manipulation. And so the reality is that your solution might do lots of things, right? But we run the risk of a feature factory. But most of the time, you don't want to sell that entire thing kit and caboodle all up front. But what we're seeing, especially with fast-growing SaaS companies, whether it's in the US, in Europe, or here, is that these products have built and grown, but the go-to-market matches that, and they're trying to sell everything at once. And that is problematic because when we go back to this risk, I don't want this big risk. I want the inverse of this. I want that bit to be risk and this bit to be perceived value. But when we're trying to sell everything together, that's a problem. So, one of the reasons that companies do this is that, especially when you're playing in the enterprise space, those companies listen to analysts. So there's Gartner, there's IDC, there's Forrester, there's GigaOm. They all bias, rightly or wrongly, platforms over point solutions. And so this is why all of these companies want to go and build a platform so that they score highly in the Magic Quadrant or the Wave or the Radar. The problem is, as we've been touching on, is that while your product might do all those things, you don't want to sell all of those things up front. Because what is the holy grail of business? I want to land and expand. But if I'm trying to sell everything up front, A, that's really hard, and B, what's left to sell? Right? There is no expansion opportunity. So, buyers need to solve multiple problems, but they also want to minimize risk, but they also need their products to work together, whether that's different components from your solution or different vendors working together. So one thing that is not explicitly called out here, the more integration that you have with other things that are complementary to that ecosystem, the more highly you're going to be scored. But also, what we see is that big monolithic product is built together and sold together. We absolutely have to have alignment between product development and go-to-market, but that also needs to come back from the market all the way through to product in the way a customer wants to buy it. So I'll give an example with Ship It in a second, right? But rather than trying to sell 5 different modules and speak to 6 different departments with wildly differing requirements and budgets and internal political problems, if we just sell one piece, and obviously the product supports that compartmentalization, the easier it is for us to sell, the faster it is for us to sell, and the bigger the deals are, and the more quickly we can expand those use cases throughout the organization. So, what we want to do is build modular platforms, right? We want to allow teams to solve one problem at a time. It reduces the risk of having this big expenditure and this big project, because certainly in IT and software in general, we know that most technology projects, when they are, companies are buying them, go over budget and over time. And what we also know is the way companies are buying now has changed. They don't trust salespeople. Sales are the least trusted in history. So they want to listen to their peers. They want to listen to industry groups. They want to listen to other people who have done this and done it well and got the result. But the negative impact of that is that whereas before the buying cycle couldn't progress until the salesperson moved the sales cycle and they moved in lockstep, now the customer goes all the way around to a buying decision and only engages at the point that they want pricing. What we're seeing is most of the time the customer misdiagnoses their problem and thus misselects the solution. And that's one of the big reasons as to why projects go bad. Right? So the smaller you can make yourself, the faster you can sell and the more easily you can overcome those things, and in some cases re-architect the solution by redefining the problem, right? But if we can build to integrate multiple components and sell in the same way, right, being buyer-led rather than sales-led or product-led, but the way the customer wants to consume and solve problems internally, you will be you'll be positioned very differently in the market. Right? So who is it that does that? Is anybody surprised at the team that owns all of those different components, right? So I was talking to Trish about this earlier. There is this explosion of product marketers, certainly in Australia, but it's the same in the US and in Europe at the minute. But as a function, these things have existed for forever. Like we all know the 5 Ps or the 7 Ps of marketing, right? That those things need to happen. But the problem is, and I see this working with super large enterprises, that messaging gets done per asset, not even per launch or per product, right? It's per document as we're doing them in a release, and that's insane, right? So there needs to be this tight alignment between product development, the go-to-market, the different marketing demand teams, the sales team, the revenue teams, the ops teams, and customer success, right? But what we often see is that there's this disconnected, loosely coupled, strong, weak relationships between these different teams that all talk, but there's no real driving force behind them. So we know that the business strategy is what has to drive all of these different functions. Like everyone's got their product roadmap, they've got their engineering plan, they've got their sales targets that they need to hit, but all of that needs to be coalesced and aligned with whatever the company's fiscal goals are for that year or for that quarter, and then filtered down. But it's product marketing that has both the technical and the soft skills to negotiate and navigate all these different teams. Like even teams like legal, right? Like when we're doing things in multiple different jurisdictions, can we make this offer available in South Africa? No, because of some legal requirement. Or can we have data leave the country? No, because it has to be onshore. Like that's something that product marketing is well suited to, alongside other things like competitive positioning, compelling messaging and storytelling, launch efficiency, making sure that sales are enabled, that customer success closes that loop, right? So if we put aside the fact that those gears wouldn't actually turn because of the way they're positioned, I only noticed that after I built it. But like it's product marketing and strategy that drive all of this. And so something that I have observed is there's this constant question of where should product marketing sit? Should it sit under product? Should it sit under marketing? God forbid it might sit under sales, which is just never. Personally, I think it should sit under a dedicated strategy business, but that's not always the case. So wherever it is that you have a reporting line and an organizational structure, you still need to work with lots of different organizational units and teams. And so we are the best positioned to make sure that this business alignment flows through into product, into go-to-market, to sales, and into customer success. So what does this actually look like? So Ship It, they're an Australian startup. They do logistics, last mile delivery. They work with e-commerce platforms. So they had this problem, right? They do shipping allocation, delivery, fulfillment. They do analytics. And so they might talk to the marketing team. They might talk to the technology team, like a CTO. They might talk to warehouse and logistics. None of those teams have anything in common other than the fact that they work in the same organisation. So the warehouse manager has no idea or care about what the web digital team is doing on how they route packages. I want to be able to go and work with my logistics trucking companies, right? So what they used to have is like, I'll sell everything. They were still growing, but it was slowing down, but they could never expand. So, Jay Daly, the head of product marketing there, working with his team, he went, you know what, this isn't working, right? Their original North Star was packages shipped, but that's not really what they were trying to do. So they went back and they looked at, okay, what are the different segments that we're serving? How can we align our go-to-market and then break up our product to align to that? So it was a market-led, buyer-led, back to the product. And so now they're able to close bigger deals faster. They're able to expand quickly. They've put their prices up, and that they've increased their initial ACV between 80 and 120%. All because they've aligned the way that they build and sell their product to the way that the customer actually wants to buy, rather than just having this feature factory of, whether it's a good decision or a bad decision, of product just adding to their suite of products. So, I do have a longer interview with Jay on our podcast, if anyone wants to watch that. But this slide, I think, is super powerful. Right? They've increased their CAC to LTV, reduced sales time. They're moving up market, and they've increased their ACV. So this is something that we're seeing in a number of SaaS organisations that deal with enterprise. Not everything is going to be exactly the same when you're in mid or mid-market or SMB. But if you're dealing, like Splunk, right? You don't sell everything together, right? You break that up. And I'm sure there's even parts of your product that you could break up even further. But politics, right?
Yes.
Right, so when you're going and doing your next quarterly review or your QBR or you're doing your roadmap session, keep this in mind and know that you're not a crackpot having this crazy idea, that there is proof that aligning the way you build and go to market with the way your customer wants to buy is the holy grail of growth.
You've been listening to the Buy-led Growth Show, where we help you scale without wasting spend.